Welcome to the Politicrat. I am Omar Moore. It is Saturday, July the 11th, 2020. On this episode, Anti-Semitism. We have to learn these lessons. We have to understand. We all must be better. That's how I start this episode of the Politicrat. I'm referring to the very grave issue and problem that we have, not just in this country, but around the world, of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish attitudes, attacks on Jewish people. This is not only an ongoing problem, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. I'm very concerned. Very concerned. Deshaun Jackson of the Philadelphia Eagles. Many of you may have heard that he posted some comments to social media that were deeply offensive and anti-Semitic. He apologized, I think, in a very sincere way about it, but the damage had been done. The damage had already been done. What I do appreciate, though, is that Deshaun Jackson has now begun educating himself and reaching out to members of the Jewish community, parts of the Jewish community. He has had dialogues with, in one case, an individual who survived the Holocaust against Jewish people. And that Holocaust was literally in this lifetime. I mean, barely 80 years ago, less than 80 years ago. If that, I mean, Auschwitz had been liberated 75 years ago, this past January of 1945. That's only 75 years ago. And even if it was 700 years ago, my point is that we are a human era that is never disconnected from our history, never disconnected in the sense that what we've done before is connected to us to this very day. What has happened in history still lives through and connects. And this is the thing that I am very concerned about. While we're connected to history, many of us have forgotten history. Many of us have pretended that the Holocaust didn't happen. The Holocaust against Jewish people somehow didn't happen. That's what some people think that still in 2020. That's unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to you. It's definitely unacceptable to me. And this cannot stand. This is not just about education, but it is about really connecting with people who are descendants of that horrible, evil experience, that genocide of a group of people And I think there's no question about this. And I don't need, quite frankly, the Pew Research Center to tell me this. And I knew this before the Pew Research Center said it, before the FBI said it, before articles in certain online publications said it. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in the United States of America, and it is on the rise across the globe. And we all have a responsibility, each and every one of us, to call out anti-Semitism and confront people who say things that are anti-Jewish in terms of the ethnicity and the faith of individuals, and make it clear that what they're saying is evil, it is anti-Semitic, it is wrong, and if you have those kinds of views, you say those kinds of things, and you do those kinds of things, you're not welcome here. We're going to call you out, and also we're going to prosecute you for hate crimes. If you do something that's hateful against a Jewish person, if you say something that's anti-Semitic and you do that, we're going to call you out. And if we have video running while you're saying these things, we can assure you that you'll be prosecuted for what you're saying or what you're doing. I think that's the attitude that we all have to have. That's the attitude that we all have to have. And I say this to everybody. I say this to some black people. I say this to all groups. Black people. I say this to white people. I say this to people of all faiths, all races, all groups. I say this to Democratic Party politicians. I say this to Republican Party politicians. Donald Trump, as well, of course, has been a major player in this. And I think that it's very clear that at the same time, you can criticize a government for its policies against the Palestinians. You can do that, just like you can criticize the American government for its policies against certain people, just like you can criticize the UK government for its policies against certain people. You can criticize Saudi Arabia for its policies against certain people, particularly against women. You can criticize Russia for its policies, its governmental policies against gay people, against transgender people. You can criticize a government, whether it's Israel, whether it's Russia, whether it's the American government, whether it's the UK government, whether it's a government on the African continent. You can do that. The government's policy. You can criticize those things. But what I have a real problem with is when you start to attack groups of people, black, Jewish, gay, transgender, bisexual, Latinx, Asian. I can go on and on. You can attack the policies of a government But when you start to attack Jewish people, whether violently or whether verbally, you have not only crossed a line, but you are certainly one of the people that Hitler surely would have loved. And you should be condemned forever for your anti-Jewish statements and your behavior. That goes and applies to everybody who has done or said these kinds of things that are poisonous, evil, and reprehensible. I certainly condemn Deshaun Jackson's comments and his postings. At the same time, I applaud him now for reaching out to people who have survived the Holocaust. That's what I applaud him for, that he wants to do the work, that he has consulted people, that he has taken those important first steps, and that he's learning, and that he in turn can educate others and actually move and inspire others to also learn and educate themselves. You know, I've heard people say, oh my goodness, there's so many documentaries about the Holocaust. I think there needs to be even more documentaries about the Holocaust. You know why? Because obviously there are still many, many people in the United States and beyond who seem to think that the Holocaust never happened. That's what they seem to think. They are these sick, twisted deniers, these people who walk around with this filth in their heads. There needs to be more. There is not a finite level of stories to tell. Just like there is not a finite level of stories to tell about the Black experience, the African experience, across the diaspora. Stories are unlimited. There should be more documentaries on the Holocaust. There should be more. There should be more documentaries on enslavement. There should be more documentaries on the rich history of Black people that goes beyond enslavement, that preceded enslavement. The kingdoms and queendoms on the African continent. There needs to be more of everything in terms of educating people. We have got to do more of it. And I don't think it has to be solely Jewish people doing this. The Deshaun Jacksons of the world, myself, you, all of us who have a little bit of knowledge, or who are in the midst, as Deshaun Jackson is, of acquiring more knowledge and understanding and connection and enlightenment, we all have that responsibility, quite frankly. And I get it, yes. Jewish people have the best position of taking their own stories and telling them because the stories belong to them. So, of course, a Jewish person should tell the stories of their history and of the things that have happened in their history. Because if they don't, who will try to take that and own it for themselves? So just like Black people should be able to tell their stories, because the stories are theirs. They belong to them. Jewish people should too. Why shouldn't a Jewish person tell their story? The oppression, the hatred, what happened at Auschwitz, Dachau. What happened in these places? That is something that we should be talking about. That's what we should be talking about. And I do think that we all have a responsibility to educate ourselves. And also, as I said, to call out anti-Semitism wherever it is. I've had to correct people, not only correct them, I've had to call them out. When I've heard this here in California, I've had to call people out. When I've heard people say anti-Jewish things, anti-Semitic things, I've had to say, I've stood up. Look, this is not about me. This is about all of us standing up and saying something to let the person who says these things know that it is not permitted. Not allowed. We're not going to let you get away with saying that and have it not be challenged. I recommend to you, by the way, and it's a book I've read a number of times on Twitter, at the Popcorn REEL. I recommend a book to you called They Thought They Were Free. That book is by Milton Mayer. His last name is spelled Mayer. Subtitle, The Germans, 1933 to 45. This book is about a group of Germans who were living during the Holocaust, living during the time that Germany was Nazi Germany, or became Nazi Germany, and then was Nazi Germany under the rule of Adolf Hitler. And these German individuals were describing the climate in the country that had been going on for that 12, 13, 14-year period. And how quickly and how easily the country went from being this industrious country where people not having this kind of overt hatred to suddenly, in the blink of an eye, like that, murdering, genociding Jewish people, just like that. It was literally an overnight thing. And they talk about this in detail. Now, the way they describe it is that there were these incremental things that happened that you would kind of get alarmed at, but wouldn't open your mouth and say anything about. Your brain registered that this was wrong, but you didn't say anything. And those kinds of incidents and events and effects repeated themselves over and over and over, until one day, as one of the persons in the book says, the farmer sees his cornfield grow, and it is over his head. The cornfield has grown so high that it has effectively drowned him. And that was the temperature of how Germany became Nazi Germany. Bit by bit by bit. I mean, they could never throw it at you all at once because people would absolutely object. and not just object. They would object in very large, substantial numbers. But what this book talks about, at least in one of the chapters, and I do urge you to read this book, recommend it very highly, very important book. The book talks about how these incremental things built upon each other, one after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next, like building blocks, slowly, until boom, you flick a switch and you've got swastikas all over the place. You flick a switch and you've got Jewish people in concentration camps. You flick a switch and you've got Germans openly screaming at people, screaming at Jewish people. You got little boys saying these derogatory, horrible things about Jewish people. And that's one of the things that gets talked about in the book. How this German guy looks at his son, and then the alarm bell goes off. When his son says, and I don't want to repeat the epithets, but when his son says this thing, this very evil thing about a Jewish person, his young boy, that's when the light bulb went off for this particular man in Germany. Welcome back. So I do recommend this book. Again, it's called They Thought They Were Free. And it's by Milton Mayer, Milton Mayer. Last name is Mayer. I am fed up, quite frankly, of the quote-unquote conspiracy theories. It makes me sick. It really does. Look, there in every group are some individuals who have ill intent and do horrible things. Every group in history has a small number of people who do evil things. But if you are going to extrapolate that to every single person in a group, that is at best a problematic proposition. Now, in historical context, you may say, well, white people in particular benefit from a system of whiteness and of enslavement. That's true. Because that's just true. That's just factual. They benefit from that. Even if they never had any participation in the enslavement trade, even if it was so that they didn't. Maybe their ancestors did. Maybe some of the ancestors did not. But the net effect is that regardless, white people today benefit from by virtue of their position in the society. And a system of whiteness, which is really a system of anti-blackness, allows white people to benefit. Structurally, systemically, economically, white families having 5, 10, 20, 30 times the kind of wealth, the wealth that black families have. I mean, that's all factual and documented and clear. Because the enslavement trade gave that kind of advantage to white people And, of course, they had a 500-year head start. There's nothing about that that is not true. It's all true. What I have a strong aversion to and a strong objection to is when you take an evil thing that a small group of people did, 5 or 6 or 7, and then extrapolate that to an entire faith. I have a problem with that. I really have a problem with that. I just think it's horrible. And I think history needs to be looked at. I mean, you need to look at history, examine it, study it, and vow not to repeat the ugliest elements of it, and vow not to repeat the evils of it, the evil things that arose from it. And we're seeing this all over this country. People are repeating this. How many people remember that in January or February of this year, in Arizona, Bernie Sanders, who is Jewish, held a rally there. I believe it was in Phoenix. And in the arena, this is before COVID-19 really hit, showing you how incredible this, to say the least, maybe incredible is the wrong word, but showing you how this year has really changed. In January or February of this year, and it may have been January of 2020, at a rally in Arizona that Bernie had in an arena, in a packed arena, there was a white man who unfurled a swastika and gave a Heil Hitler Nazi salute. In 2020. He was ejected from the arena. I don't know if he was charged with anything or not. But what really is telling to me is that the corporate news media in the United States, the cable news media, barely said a word about the incident, did not give it any real coverage at all. What is also insidious and very dangerous is that the same corporate news media the one that people say, oh, Jewish people control it. Bullshit. This same media ignored the anti-Semitism and the Nazi salutes against Bernie Sanders. The same corporate news media, cable news media, had people on their air like Chris Matthews saying anti-Semitic things about Bernie Sanders, other commentators and people this year and in previous years as panelists on certain cable news networks, MSNBC, saying things about Bernie Sanders. Oh, he makes my skin crawl. Oh, he's from Brooklyn. Oh, he's loud. Oh, he's aggressive. All of these things I've just said are anti-Semitic tropes. Those panelists were allowed to stay on the air. Chris Matthews was allowed to stay on the air for a good few weeks until what he got fired for, which was the sexual harassment claims. and some of the stuff he did say about Bernie. But he was able to stay on the air for at least 3 more weeks. And he walked out, by the way. It's not as if MSNBC said he had to step down. So they did fire him, but then he walked off the air after 2 minutes or 3 minutes. He walked off the air. He literally didn't tell anybody he was going to do that. He just, after 3 minutes, 4 minutes, this year, walked off the air. Not on camera off the air, but he said, I thank you very much for my time and And he walked off the air. Then the next segment, when they came from break, was Steve Kornacki sitting in disbelief because they all got caught, blindsided by Chris Matthews, who I think is a coward. I think he's a racist. I think he's a misogynist. Definitely think that about him. He's clearly a misogynist. And usually when someone's a misogynist, they're also a racist. And there have been many subjects and studies done about the roots of where these things really start from. Misogyny and then the base of racism after that, or vice versa. You know, there's been a number of scholars and social scientists and people who have talked about these things, and you can read up on them if you'd like, obviously. You had people like Chris Matthews again saying things about Bernie Sanders supporters, calling them brown shirts. This is in 2020. This is in this calendar year that we are presently in. So you are evoking Nazi Germany references. You're invoking Hitler's violent soldiers and his SS and all of this. And you're using that for the supporters of Bernie Sanders, and you're calling them that? You're attacking his supporters now? And it's not just Chris Matthews. I can name all the rest of them. Some of them are getting promotions. Some of them got promotions. Some of them since ran for office. This is not acceptable anywhere. This hatred of Jewish people, this attacking of Jewish people is unacceptable anywhere. And we've got to call it out. We've got to call it out. We do. And you may like people, but when the people you like say things like this, you've got to make it clear to them that what they are saying is abhorrent and you will not abide by it. Sometimes you really do have to lose friendships with people. I've had to. That is what you have to do if you believe in being an ally to people. If you believe in allyship, and there are people, and I don't disagree with them, who say it's not enough sometimes, rather, quite frankly, to just be an ally. You have to be an accomplice. And there is a huge difference there. Because allies don't necessarily pay a price. In Donald Trump's world, they do. But accomplices do pay a price. That is how this thing works. Accomplices. Viola Luiso, James Reeb, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, Heather Heyer, Summer Taylor. These are just a few of the accomplices who paid a price. their lives. We had in the United States, in October of 2018, the Tree of Life synagogue terrorist attack done by a white man who had said all kinds of hateful things and racist things. And he invoked Donald Trump. At least 12 people, if not more, Jewish people, killed in this synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. We have had violence at the Poway Synagogue in San Diego as well, or not far from San Diego, here in California. Of course, we had what happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, in March of 2019 at the mosque there, where at least 50 people of Muslim faith were murdered. Much of it unfolding on YouTube and other platforms. Took them nearly 2 days to get rid of this. I mean, I can post something on YouTube, and if it has some issue with a musical copyright, that's down in 5 minutes. But why is it that something that's anti-Semitic, something that is anti-women, something that is racist, anti-black, how come that gets to stay up on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, especially Facebook, for days and weeks and months? Sometimes never taken down. Sometimes the user who posts it is not suspended. Many times. We got one in the White House. When he posted during the 2016 campaign a photo or drawing of Hillary Clinton and a red star that was clearly the Star of David, but in red, and inside the star was written "Most Corrupt Candidate Ever." And in the backdrop, the wallpaper of the picture was a pile of money. That is clearly anti-Semitic. That was Donald Trump tweeting that out. That was Donald Trump from his Twitter account. That is anti-Jewish, is anti-Semitic. And he knew it was. Because within a few days or hours, he was forced to change it. And then he changed the Star of David that was clearly present there in that tweet to a red circle instead. He didn't change the backdrop. I don't think he did. I think it still had the tons of money in the background, though. He recently, or someone did, if it wasn't him, He certainly did. He was on Facebook, and someone tweeted out from his Facebook account, if it wasn't him, it may have been him, an upside down red triangle, which was a symbol of Nazi dominance and oppression of groups, of Jewish groups, of Jewish people. Then more recently, just literally a week ago, last week, people have already forgotten this. Trump released this new slogan, this new logo for his 2020 campaign called America First, and it had exactly the same insignia as the Nazi logo did, the Third Reich logo. Same exact thing. Except instead of the swastika, it was an American flag at the bottom that had Trump 2020 in it. In Charlottesville, in 2017, Charlottesville, Virginia, you had hundreds of white men and some white women as well marching on the campus of the University of Virginia, saying Jews will not replace us. August the 11th, I believe it was. August the 10th, whatever it was, August the 10th or August the 11th of 2017, while Donald Trump was in office, saying those horrible things about Jewish people. Hundreds, I'm not talking about one or two, and that's one or two too many. I'm talking about hundreds of people with tiki torches. And then the next day, Heather Heyer gets murdered by a white racist. He runs her over, killing her. And then you've got Donald Trump saying that there were very fine people on both sides. One side was Nazis with swastikas and Confederate battle flags, and they are very fine people to him. He had David Duke there, and he never has anything good to say about Jewish people. This year, in Michigan and in other cities and states, in the state of Michigan, you had in April and May of 2020, white men and some white women literally invading the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan. Hundreds of them. This is during the COVID era that we live in presently. No mask. That was the least of this, as horrible as that is, during this pandemic. They carried swastikas, Trump signs, Confederate battle flags, nooses, and they were shouting racist, anti-Semitic things at Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. They were threatening her life. This is a few short months ago, this year, 2020. This climate has never gone away. And just like the German man, one of the several Germans profiled in Milton Mayer's book that I highly recommended to you earlier in this episode, all of a sudden, just like that, this Nazism and this anti-Jewish hatred was open and in your face and accepted by the so-called good Germans who said nothing at all. And their silence was violence. And their silence was consent. And then they eagerly joined in with the salutes. Another book I would recommend to you, Hannah Arendt, one of the most important writers that we've ever had on this planet. Hannah Arendt, A-R-E-N-D-T. Really important book that she wrote. The Origins of Totalitarianism. There's a chapter in there about anti-Semitism. I urge you to read that book, but I especially urge you to read that chapter. One of the things that Jewish people always say, and one of the greatest respects that I have for Jewish people, one of those things is when they say never again. And I totally support never again. I'm on board totally with that. We must never forget what happened at Auschwitz and Dachau and all of the other places where Jewish people were exterminated, genocided, taken to ovens. In the last 80 years, never again. We must not only say it, but we must ensure it. Because the climate that we have now, not just in this country, but across the planet, and I tell you, in France, anti-Semitism is really at an all-time high. But it is everywhere. It's an evil that we must stamp out. We must all do our part. We must all do our part. And it starts with educating ourselves. It does start with books like the one that I have, the two books that I highly recommend. Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism, particularly that chapter on anti-Semitism, and also the very important book as well, just like Arendt's very important book, the very important book by Milton Mayer. They thought they were free. I'm going to read, actually, a small portion, of Milton Mayer's book in just a moment. So in the last 80 years, the last 80, 85 years, the last 85 or 90 years, it's within the last 100 years, the last 90 years, what we in human history have seen when it comes to the atrocities against Jewish people, crimes against humanity. And there are a lot of people, quite frankly, who are very complicit in those crimes. I want to read just a short part of a chapter from Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free. Subtitle is The Germans, 1933 to 45. From the chapter, But Then It Was Too Late. But the one great, shocking occasion when tens or hundreds or thousands will join you never comes. That's the difficulty. If the last and worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and smallest, thousands, yes, millions, would have been sufficiently shocked if, let us say, the gassing of the Jews in 43 had come immediately after the German firm stickers on the windows of non-Jewish shops in 33. But of course, this isn't the way it happens. In between come all the hundreds of little steps, some of them imperceptible, each of them preparing you not to be shocked by the next. Step C is not so much worse than step B, and if you did not make a stand at step B, why should you at step C? And so on to step D. And one day, too late, your principles, if you were ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy, and some minor incident, in my case, my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying, "Jew swine," collapses it all at once. And you see that everything has changed, and changed completely under your nose. The world you live in, your nation, your people, is not the world you were born in at all. The forms are all there, all untouched, all reassuring. The houses, the shops, the jobs, the meal times, the visits, the concerts, the cinema, the holidays. But the spirit, which you never noticed, because you made the lifelong mistake of identifying it with the forms, is changed. Now you live in a world of hate and fear, and the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves. When everyone is transformed, no one is transformed. Now you live in a system which rules without responsibility even to God. The system itself could not have intended this in the beginning, but in order to sustain itself, it was compelled to go all the way. From the chapter, But Then It Was Too Late. From the book, They Thought They Were Free. The Germans, 1933 to 45. By Milton Mayer. Never again. Never, ever again. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.